Jay Adams, Tony Alva, and I got picked up on a wave when we were 16 years of age. It was a remarkable time to come from, but every great experience has heartbreak and it has pure joy and elation. And the Dogtown experience has all those things. It has joy, pure joy, elation, and it has complete, utter heartbreak. We went from normal kids to suddenly, we're little rock stars on skateboards.
I'm Justin Jay, and this is The Plug. In the mid-1970s, journalist and artist Craig Stesic began chronicling a group of young, rebellious skaters from the streets of Venice and Santa Monica. Blending surfing's fluid style with aggressive innovation, these skateboarders would become known as the Z-Boys, a name that would leave an indelible mark on skate history. Today's guest is an original Z-Boy and a true pioneer of California skateboarding. After a successful career as a pro skater, he co-founded Powell Peralta Skateboards, one of the most iconic skate brands of all time. He later directed several acclaimed documentaries, including Dogtown and Z-Boys, Riding Giants, and Bones Brigade, an autobiography, cementing his legacy as one of the sport's most important figures. Recently, he began a new chapter as a fine art painter, drawing inspiration from the objects that shaped his life. His still life paintings capture vintage, decaying skateboards, worn-down trucks, clay wheels, and other skate artifacts, items that many people might consider junk. But to him, they hold a deeper meaning and significance. Just as the Z-Boys had the vision to transform abandoned pools and cracked asphalt into skatable terrain, he's once again found beauty and value in what others might discard. So what's it like having a prestigious gallery show just a mile or two away from where your entire journey as a teenage skateboarder started? We'll find out as we sit down for a chat with one of the most influential skaters of all time. Today, skateboarder, entrepreneur, TV and film director, and fine art painter, Mr. Stacy Peralta. Stacy Peralta, it's a pleasure to meet you. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit down. It's great to have you.
Well, thanks, Justin. Sorry for the trickiness getting into this thing. I'm not a tech guy at all, so when I'm asked to download stuff, it's always an issue. But somehow we got here.
That surprises me. But all right. Well, I want to jump right in and just say, congratulations on your art show of paintings. It's kind of a love letter to skateboarding called Against the Current. And I think a lot of people know you as a skateboarder and as a director. But I think this body of work might be something a little outside of what people might expect from you. So, tell me a little bit about what this show is and how it came about.
Well, just for you to know, it's outside of my own understanding of myself. I didn't know that I had this in me. Here's what I will say, though. I've been wanting to paint all my life, okay? I've been drawing since I was a kid. In fact, I was able to graduate high school only because my teachers let me doodle when they lectured.
Wow.
And if I didn't doodle, my mind would wander. But if I doodled and while they lectured, what they said absorbed into me. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but that's a very effective way to communicate, to listen to people, is when you doodle. I didn't learn about that until I was in my 40s. So I was doing something automatically. Anyways, my doodling eventually transformed to abstract drawing. And I've been drawing abstractly for all my life. I always wanted to paint, so I figured I would paint abstractly. But when I did, I didn't like the results, so I stopped doing it. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that an event happened in my life that showed me a way to get into painting and introduced a style of painting that I never thought I would do, which is more like real life, and it's nothing like abstract. So it was a complete surprise to find this out.
The show first opened up in a gallery in Central California, in Cambria, which is a really beautiful place, but maybe not the most accessible place for a lot of people to get to see the show. But recently you also had an opening in Mar Vista in LA, and that must have been a really spectacular place to show that body of work, because it's in a place that's literally just miles away from Venice, miles away from the original Zephyr shop, miles away from really where your story first began and kind of like the story of modern skateboard culture began. I mean, how are those two different openings different for you?
Well, the one in Mar Vista, and Mar Vista, for your listeners who don't know where it is, it's basically right next to Venice. The gallery that we opened up at was blocks away from Venice High School, where I went to school. It was less than a mile from where my mom still lives, okay? So it was a really cosmic experience. We did a one-night show down there because we knew Cambria, which is where the show opened up, was limited because it's 3.5 hours drive out of LA. We knew a lot of people in LA would want to see the show, and we encouraged them not to come up here because it's just too long of a drive, and we didn't think the gallery up here would be able to handle the number of people. So we said, hey, we're going to do a one-night show in LA. We gave the dates. And so we had the show up here, and it turned out really fantastic. It was a great affair. There were kids and people skateboarding outside and making human tubes, and it was just a really great showing. And then when we went to Los Angeles, that's when I got to see a lot of my, good friends and compatriots and peers that I work in the film business with. So both shows were kind of different experiences, but really, really high vibes. Really great experience.
Cool. Well, I want to give a quick shout out to Charlie Smith for making this conversation happen too, because I know he was really instrumental both in your show, but also in being a liaison for this podcast. So,
well, Charlie is a force of nature. Charlie's going to be a very successful guy at what he does because he's a force of nature. He's extremely proactive. He's extremely creative. And he's really good at collecting the right people in his life. He's extremely good at that. And he knows how to get things done on a budget. And he had a lot of ideas going into this art show that I would never have thought of, that I thought were, in fact, not great ideas. And we did them, and they turned out to be brilliant ideas.
Give me an example of an idea that you thought wouldn't work that turned out to be amazing.
He told me, he said, look, I want to make a little short film on your art show. And I went, oh no, I've done so many of these dumb short films. They always look so bad. They always are shot bad. They're edited bad. The music's bad. The story's bad. Because you can't find good filmmakers to work that cheap to do stuff like that, okay? To do productions like that. Well, he found this young filmmaker named Dana Shaw out of the Bay Area. And Dana did a remarkable job on this 6-minute piece we did, or it's 3 minutes or 6 minutes, whatever it is. It's called Against the Current. And it blew me away. It just blew me away, the finesse and the talent that Dana had and the overall vision that Charlie had. And so they made me eat my words. It turned out to be much better than I thought. And everything that Charlie did, all the decisions he made, from what art paintings that would turn into prints, what we do as photographs, everything was right on par and right,
wow.
And worked beautifully.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. I've seen it.
But Justin, I have to tell you something. Charlie came to me a year ago this February. Charlie called me and said, look, I've heard you're doing this painting. I've been told by an artist, Ned Evans, that I should, look at your paintings and see what you're up to. And he said, can I pay you a visit? I said, sure. So he came down from Cambria and I showed him what I have been doing. And he goes, I'd like to give you a show. And I go, Charlie, I've only been doing this a year. I don't deserve a show. And he goes, no, there's people that would really want what you're doing. And I was really nervous about it. And as I said, he was recommended to call me by another artist out of Venice named Ned Evans, who's kind of my art sensei. So I called Ned and I said, look, Ned, Charlie came to my house, wants to give me a show. I don't deserve to have this. And he goes, look, you got to understand something. He goes, there are many, many artists in this world that are better than you. But he goes, they don't have anything to paint. And so as a result, what they do is they paint bowls of fruit, or they paint scenics, but they don't paint things that might be personal to them. He goes, you're painting things that are part of your personal history and collection and culture. And he goes, it brings a different value to what you're painting. And when Ned put it in that context, it gave me the confidence to proceed with this, because I just didn't feel like I deserved it, because I didn't start painting for this purpose. I didn't start painting for the idea that I was going to turn this into showing it in my work in galleries. It just happened. And I actually tried to prevent it, but it was a wave that just started breaking. And so it was either get out of the way or get mowed down.
Well, I'm curious about what this show is like for you in terms of It seems like it's the polar opposite of directing a film, which is such a collaborative process. Whereas this show, it's really a solo endeavor. It's your paintings, it's your vision, it's your choices largely. Did not having a lot of other people to share credit with, did that add gravity to the situation, either in terms of how proud you were to show the work or how nervous you were to show the work? I mean, what emotions were front and center for you?
Well, you said a big question. First thing is, my relationship with Charlie, the gallery owner, was very collaborative. It was like when I make a film. He was like working with a great producer, as if I was the director. So in that regard, it was similar. But what was not similar, and what I really enjoyed immensely, I'm a lone wolf creature. I like spending a lot of time alone. I like my own company. I spend a lot of time, in my own company. And with painting, I'm able to do it by myself at any time of the day, at any hour of the day. And as a result, I spend many, many hours of my days painting. I like that time. And I don't have studio executives giving me notes on what not to do or what to do. So I'm able to make mistakes and fix them myself without having to get someone else's approval or disapproval for that. One of the things that I miss in filmmaking is, since I've been a director, I had to give up editing. And editing actually is my most favorite part of being a filmmaker, but I can't do it because I can't do both. I can't direct, produce, write, and edit. And painting, to me, is the closest, what you might say, practice to editing, because you're alone and you're assembling something by yourself. And I love that process. And so this is what I've loved so much about painting, is it gives me that experience of being alone and just creating on my own, and being there when those surprises happen.
And so not having studio executives, as an example, giving you notes and directing you how to make these paintings, does that add an extra level of kind of responsibility and pressure? Because whatever goes up on that wall, you're ultimately solely responsible for, or at least you and Charlie are responsible, but it's not a group effort.
Justin, I was really nervous to have this first show because, I didn't know if I deserved it. And I didn't know if people would look at the work without looking at it through the lens of all the other things I've done. I also didn't know if people would look at it thinking that I pushed to have this happen. I didn't. And so I wasn't sure if people would take me seriously. And as I said, I had so many questions because it happened so quickly. I wasn't sure if the work would be accepted. I wasn't sure if they just go, oh, he just got lucky. Oh, for instance, when I made Dogtown and Z-Boys, the documentary, the word I got from Hollywood, well, he made that film and he could only make that film because he's one of the guys and he understood it. He understood skateboarding. That's the only reason he was able to make it. So then when I made Riding Giants, my follow-up documentary, Hollywood said, well, he only did that because he's a surfer and he can only make that film because he's a surfer. Well, what my next film was on the gangs of South Central LA. And then they said, well, he can only make films about subcultures of males. So there's always been these stigmas of, oh, he can only do this and he can only do that. And I was wondering and thinking that the same thing was going to happen to me as a painter. Oh, he's only doing it because of this. He only can do it because of that. So I've had a very weird career in that regard. People have not understood, or they've wanted to label me in regards to what I do and how I do it and what my motivation is for doing it.
Wow. So it was less imposter syndrome and more just you didn't want to get feedback from people that didn't understand your intentions?
Exactly. Because I never called this in. When I made my films, I wanted to make those films and I wanted them to be seen in theaters. When I started painting, I didn't think about this being in galleries. Now, I'm honored. Believe me when I say this. I'm remarkably honored that it has worked out all right, worked out really well. In fact, Shepard Fairey came to see my work.
That's cool.
That blew my mind. And he actually bought a piece. That flabbergasted me, just flabbergasted me. And people in other countries have gotten in touch with Charlie to buy my work. People in Germany and Canada. It's blown my mind. It's been a complete, utter surprise. Total surprise.
Well, so I found an old Craig Stesick quote that I want to read because I think it's really interesting. He said, Skaters, by their very nature, are urban guerrillas. They make everyday use of the useless artifacts of the technological burden in 1,000 ways that the original architects could never dream of. And I found a lot of parallels between that statement and the work of your show. I mean, you saw beauty and recognized the value in a pair of dilapidated trucks or corroded garbage cans. And, you turned them into these still life paintings. And, you took artifacts that most would consider junk and you created art out of it and gave it a new life. I mean, that's the skater's approach that Craig was talking about, right? I mean, is that a fair statement?
It is. It's close to a fair statement. I think I've lived my life pretty close to that statement. In fact, when that statement first appeared in Skateboarder magazine, I felt I was reading the current equivalent of Thomas Paine from the American Revolution. To me, that was the rallying cry that we must live by. But I also have to tell you this. I can't take credit, in a sense, for deciding to paint the paintings I'm painting right now, which is, for your viewers that have not seen my work, I have one of the rarest skateboard collections in the world in that I saved all of my skateboards from the time I was a child. I have my homemade skateboards from the 1960s. I still have them. And the reason it's one of the most rare collections is from what I've come to believe and understand is I'm the only skateboarder in my position on earth who saved his collection. Well, it was my girlfriend one day, realizing that I had run out of ideas of what to paint. She said, "Why don't you paint aspects of your skateboard collection? You've been wanting to share it with people your entire life. Why don't you do that?" And my first response was, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't know how to paint wood or clay wheels. That was my first response. Well, a couple of weeks later, her voice kept, rolling around in my head. And I said, why don't I give it a try? And I did. And lo and behold, man, she was 100% right. And so what I've done is I have these boards and wheels that are 50 and 60 years old, boards and wheels that I used to ride as a child. And now I'm painting these and I'm giving a new way of seeing them to people. For instance, Shepard Fairey, when he saw the work, he said, this is like the Rosetta Stone for skateboarding. It's the very beginning. It's where it all started. And I'd like to take credit for all of this, but it's something I kind of stepped into unknowingly. But once I stepped into it and once I felt it and felt the gravity to it, I went, I'm doing the right thing. I'm in the right place. I ended up in the right place here.
I mean, the way you speak about your old skateboards and the fondness you have for, their rust and their character and how some of the wood is actually kind of decomposing, they obviously harbor a ton of memories for you. And I'm wondering, do you keep a large archive of other artifacts from your youth? I mean, are you a collector or do you tend to kind of shy away from the nostalgia of that whole era?
No, I've collected almost everything. In fact, one of the things, Charlie and I came out with a booklet that came with the show. And, they showed a lot of my paintings and a lot of my boards. And I wrote an introduction and I explained to people, because a lot of people will ask me, did you save these skateboards because you knew they'd be of value someday? And the answer is no, I didn't. I saved them because they were so important to me as a kid that I couldn't possibly part with them. That's the only reason I saved them. I never knew there would be a future for skateboarding. But if I was to have parted with one of those skateboards, 40, 50 years ago, it would have been like parting with an arm or a leg. They were a piece of who I am. They're a piece of my identity. They're a piece of my DNA. So when I look at them, there's graffiti written on the bottom of those boards, drawn on the bottom of those boards from when I was 10 years old, 12 years old. They are a piece of who I am. And so in that regard, I simply could not let go of them. They're too valuable. And of course, now I'm glad I didn't, because they are a history of the sport unto themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why that show resonated with so many people, is because it works on a lot of levels. I mean, it's a history of skateboarding, on the wall, but it's so personal to you. And I think it really reads and it translates how important and passionate you are about these paintings. It's not just pictures of old skateboard wheels and old trucks.
Right. I'm trying to capture something that I can't even articulate, to be honest with you, Justin. And when I do, it blows my own mind. Like, I will look back at paintings I've done months prior. I swear to you, I look at them and go, how the hell did I do that? I don't even know how I did it. And then I will try to paint that same painting again, and it comes out differently. So the whole thing has been a journey of surprises.
So I rewatched Dogtown and Z-Boys recently, and it's fascinating to think that basically as much time has passed since you made that film as the time between the events in the story and the film's original release, you know? And, you know, looking back at it now and how it all began, are there still things that surprise you about the space that skateboarding occupies in pop culture today?
My God, it made the Olympics. I mean, who would have ever, you have to understand something. When I started skateboarding as a kid, it was what's considered during the time of the Dark Ages. Skateboarding became popular briefly in 1964 and 1965, just like, you know, the yo-yo and the hula hoop. Those three things came and went at the same time. And because they came and went as in became extinct, people didn't take skateboarding seriously. But where I lived, in the neighborhood I lived in, we did take it really seriously. But we didn't call ourselves skateboarders because there was no such thing as a skateboarder back then. What we were was surfers, but we were surfers who wanted to surf on the sidewalk. We wanted to surf as much as we could, but we couldn't spend all day at the beach. And so when we weren't at the beach, we were riding our skateboards. But in riding our skateboards, we were really imagining ourselves surfing. All the body movements were surfing inspired. And the whole purpose of being a good skateboarder was to be a better surfer. So we were surfers who rode skateboards, but we were not skateboarders. And I say that not because we didn't feel we weren't, but because there was just no such thing as being a skateboarder back then. So to see how it's progressed today, to see that there's an amazing street skating aspect and vertical skateboarding and tranny skateboarding, and it's in the Olympics, it's a cultural phenomenon. It's simply stunning. And it's all over the world. It's girls in Ethiopia and Afghanistan. You know, it's simply stunning. And they all do it for the same reason we did it. It brings joy. It just brings joy to your life, you know, and it brings meaning and it brings identity and it gives you something to shoot for. And so when I see kids, no matter where they are in the world doing it, I'm connected to those kids from my own experience.
Wow, that's really cool. I want to talk about your directing career for a second, because, you know, it seems like in the late 90s, in the kind of heyday of big budget music videos, there were a lot of video directors that kind of segued into directing these big scripted features. And, you know, the movies always looked beautiful, but the skill set of making a compelling visual isn't necessarily the same as the ability to craft a really powerful emotional arc in a narrative. And, you know, you came from a background making skate videos for the Bones team. And as your career progressed and you decided to kind of take bites of bigger projects, I'm wondering why you chose documentary filmmaking as opposed to, you know, something scripted. I mean, in an alternate universe, could you have seen yourself directing Lords of Dogtown instead of making Dogtown and Z-Boys?
Well, okay, so this is another thing that, you know, where I'm thinking I'm going left and my life turns right. This has happened all throughout my life. I set out to be a feature director. During the 90s, I wrote 5 screenplays by myself, taught myself to write screenplays, hoping that I was going to become a feature director. I was directing in television. I wanted to move into film. The only reason I became a documentary filmmaker is because Hollywood got a hold of the idea of making Lords of Dogtown, which is a film I'd always wanted to make. And that's gave me the idea. I went, okay, if Hollywood's doing the screen version, the fictional version, I will do the documentary version. So I went home this one day and wrote the treatment for the documentary version of Dogtown. I was fortunate to get the financing for it. I was fortunate enough to make the film. Fortunate enough to have the film turn out to be a great success. And that launched me into a career I had never planned. And it turns out my skill set worked very well for documentary films. It works very well for documentary films because I know so many aspects of the filmmaking process, from shooting to editing to producing to writing to directing. And so it worked out really well. But I always wanted to work with actors and direct features. So that's what I wanted to do. But my life didn't go that direction.
So the choice for you to get into documentaries as opposed to scripted features was kind of made by external forces by accident?
Yes. Yes. But I will say one thing. The woman, my longtime girlfriend that I was with at the time, I'm an avid reader. I've always got a number of books going at any given time, and I only read nonfiction. I never read fiction. And it's not because I'm against fiction. It's just that I look at my books as my education. And when I was 19, I decided I needed to develop myself into a reader because I'd had such a bad education, poor education. And I knew that I wasn't properly educated. And I knew that the only way I was ever going to become properly educated is if I read books. And so I started reading at age 19, and I only read nonfiction. And it's been that way my whole life. So my girlfriend one day said to me, she goes, "Why are you writing scripts? You love nonfiction. It doesn't make any sense." And it really hit me when she said that. I really realized, why am I doing this? Nonfiction is what I love. And so that was another thing that helped me understand my direction, that I was tumbled into in documentary filmmaking, because it's nonfiction.
Well, we had Sam Jones, the director, on the podcast a while back when
good friend of mine.
Wonderful conversation. Really nice guy. A big fan even of his still photography. A big fan of his work. But we had him on a while right when his Tony Hawk documentary came out. And one of the things that we discussed is this kind of inherent conflict in a documentary between the subject and how much influence that subject gets on the way the narrative is told, like particularly when the story arc might not be so flattering. With Tony's movie, I think in its entirety, I think it's overall a very flattering portrait of Tony Hawk. But there are a couple chapters in there that deal with some of his shortcomings as a father and as a husband. And, they're a little raw and a little revealing. But Sam was really unyielding in his approach, his warts and all approach to that movie. And I think it served it very well in the end. With respect to Dogtown and Z-Boys, you were not only a character and a subject in the movie, but you were the director too. And I'm wondering, when you set out to make that film, did you have a strategy of how much you did or didn't want to be a part of the story? Like, how did you navigate that?
That's a really good question. And when I made Dogtown and Z-Boys, I was the filmmaker and I was also one of the characters in the film. And Tony Alva, Jay Adams, and myself are the most successful out of that group. In the Skateboarding Hall of Fame, Tony's number 1, I'm number 2, Jay Adams is number 3. Now, this is not to take anything away from the other guys, but because I was the filmmaker of this movie and in it, I downplayed my place in the story. And one day, Skip Engblom came to see an early cut of the film. And after the film was over, he took me aside and said, "Where are you in this film?" And I said, "I don't feel it's right that I put myself in here too much." And he goes, "If you do that, you're rewriting history falsely." He goes, "You have to put yourself in this film because you're a huge part of this story." And he kind of it was, the come to Jesus moment with him. And it was a very important moment because when he made me realize it in that regard, that I was actually rewriting history by not showing myself, then I went, okay, I understand what he's saying. And because it came from Skip, I was getting his blessing. And so I acquiesced at that point and re-looked at it and said, okay, I'll figure out a way to put myself in the film a bit more but still walk that fine line. Because I honestly thought when I made that film, I was going to get savaged by critics. I really did. And it turns out I didn't. I was surprised by that.
And were you afraid of getting savaged by your peers as well?
Probably everybody, to be honest with you. To me, it seemed like a no-win situation. Just no win. I'm walking into a thing where I'm just going to get ripped to shreds. And in many regards, I was ripped to shreds anyways, because there were so many people that felt they should have been in the film, et cetera, but, that I took a lot of grief from.
So, I watched Glenn E. Friedman's short film that revisits the kind of Dogtown era. And I'm curious, what's your personal takeaway from that period of your life? I mean, are there still some open wounds from your experiences, or is it generally a part of your life that you look back fondly on? Because your fictional character in Lords of Dogtown, there's a lot of sadness in that character.
It's good. It's a good point. Here's something that's really, really weird. I'll try to explain this to you. Dogtown, the documentary, took me a year to get financing. Okay. A year of meetings. It took a year to make the film. And then it took a year for me to be on the road, traveling all over the world at film festivals, introducing the film and promoting the film. So that's 3 years on one film. When I got done with that experience, I then had to go into writing the script for Lords of Dogtown. It was one of the most difficult assignments I've ever done because my brain did not want to cooperate. It was so tired of that world. Not tired of it, it was just burned out. And now I not only had to be a part of that world again, but I had to reimagine it in a whole nother way, and I wasn't ready for it. And what's really strange, it was a struggle the entire time to write that script. That story came out of me 5 years ago. The story that originally should have come out 20 years ago when I wrote it, 5 years ago it came out of me. And I wrote it again.
What are the major differences in terms of the character arcs?
The story was much more true to each character. Each character was stronger. Each character had a stronger three-act structure arc, and it flowed in a way that I never could get the original to flow. And so I look at that. It was a really hard experience. It was just a really, really tough experience. And I don't feel that I delivered what I could have delivered because of that, having been involved in it for 3 years prior to that.
And, outside of your experiences translated either into fiction or nonfiction, like what's your gut feeling about that part of your life? Do you have regrets? Are you fond? Do you yearn for it? I mean, what's the takeaway from that period of your life?
It was a remarkable time in my life. It was a remarkable time in all of our lives. Jay Adams, Tony Alva, and I got picked up on a wave when we were 16 years of age. And for Tony and myself, we are still riding that same wave. And that wave has reshaped. It's broken in ways we never thought. It's taken us places we've never, ever thought we'd go to, see, or achieve. It was remarkable. It was a remarkable time to come from. But no, you can't color anything one way. You can't say anything was great or anything was terrible. Any great experience is a 3-act structure. It has everything to it. Every great experience has heartbreak and it has pure joy and elation. And the Dogtown experience has all those things. It has joy, pure joy, elation, and it has complete, utter heartbreak. All of it in one.
Yeah.
And it was 3 young kids getting propelled into a life that none of us expected. None of us were trained for. None of us had the what you would call the articulation or the understanding of what do we do here? We went from normal kids to suddenly, we're little rock stars on skateboards. That can really tweak your self awareness.
Yeah.
And it did all of ours. And some of us came out okay, and some of us got really, really burned by it.
Yeah. I'm always amazed when I watch documentaries at the amount of footage that exists for topics that existed in an era where there weren't really a lot of cameras, or it was really expensive to shoot and document stuff. But moving forward, we live in this age where virtually everything is documented, maybe too much. And it seems like, directing a documentary, I always thought that it felt like you're putting together this big puzzle, and there's all these pieces. But if there's an infinite number of pieces, does that make it impossible to sort through and make sense of it all? I mean, do you think that the abundance of content will change the format of documentaries and how the stories are told?
No, because it always comes down to the story. It always comes down to the story. Like you said earlier, the directors that came from the rock video world, they knew imagery, but they didn't necessarily know story. All great filmmakers have to be great storytellers. It just comes down to that. The more visual material you have, the better, because you have visual evidence that such and such a thing happened. So no, I think it only helps. But are we going to educate people well enough in this country to create great filmmakers? That's the question. Yeah. Is our educational system is so dull, and it's failing so many kids because it's so unimaginative. That's the problem. And that's the education that I had as a kid. It was dull and it was unimaginative. And when I sat in those classrooms could not compete with my imagination. And so even though I was present, my imagination was somewhere else, cooking all sorts of things up while I was in school, because school didn't do it for me. Fortunately, I had that imagination, though, that, carried me to other places. I just want to recap on something you asked earlier about the Dogtown thing. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, and I try not to, because I'm really conscious of living my life forward and accomplishing my dreams and continuing to accomplish my dreams and continuing to discover what other dreams are within me. Because one of the things that, if you haven't noticed from this conversation already, is my life has been a mystery to me. I didn't know I was going to become a professional skateboarder. I didn't know I was going to become an entrepreneur skateboarder. I didn't know I was going to become a filmmaker or a documentary filmmaker or a painter. All of these things were my life going down a certain direction, and I think I'm going left, but suddenly life takes me and swings me and takes me towards the right. And if I've done anything right in my life, is I haven't resisted life to the point where I got in the way. And that's something that I've discovered. You have to set your sail properly in life, but you also have to be aware of where the winds want to push you for your own benefit. And be careful not to resist and be too dogmatic when you're going a direction that you hadn't planned, but that direction ends up turning out better than anything you could have planned.
Wow. I'm curious, as a director, what do you like and what don't you like stylistically about documentaries? Are there some things that you see in other documentaries that make you cringe or that you consciously avoid in your movies?
Well, I think if you look at my films, they're an example. Prior to Dogtown and Z-Boys, documentary films were a pretty staid medium. They were looked at as broccoli. Prior to Dogtown and Z-Boys, and I'm not saying Dogtown was the first one, but it was one of the first documentaries to show that there's another way to do this, okay? Prior to that time, documentaries were looked at as eating vegetables. I should go see this movie. It'll be interesting, but it's going to be a dreary experience, okay? That's what documentaries were. When we made Dogtown, we decided we were going to make something that was really entertainment. And we first toyed with the idea of not calling it a documentary, but calling it nonfiction entertainment, okay? Because we wanted to get out of that idea of it's documentary, it's vegetables. But if you look at it, I try to come in with really inspiring music, really inspiring visuals, upping the pace of the cutting, and inspiring the way they're shot. And so it's all those things. As a documentary filmmaker, I'm still competing against the top tentpole films out there. So I've got to give the audience something that's exciting. And so I try to make my films in a way that they're used to seeing entertainment, even though it's a documentary.
The soundtrack for Dogtown was really amazing. You guys licensed a lot of amazing songs for that. And we had on Randall Poster recently. He's like one of the best music supervisors in the business. And we talked about this misconception that people think that I have great taste in music. I could be a great music supervisor. And there's so much more to it in terms of like the economics of licensing and trying to get stuff fit into your budget. Do you come up against that a lot? Do you have to deal with that when you're directing a documentary?
Are you kidding me? Do I have to deal with that? That's huge. Look, one of the most important aspects of my films is the music budget. It's one of the biggest parts. In fact, I can't understand the film until I understand the music that's going to underlie the film. And the soundtrack is the first thing I begin building when I'm starting a film. I start putting together songs that that make me feel and understand the tone of the film. And I own thousands of pieces of music, okay? During the lead up to making a film, I will continuously put my music on shuffle or whatever you call it, because I want to come across music that I'm not even aware that I have in my library. And I will write down titles that I hear and go, oh, that'd be perfect for such and such. That'd be perfect for the second act opening. That would be perfect for the close of the film. And that's how I start a film. I got to understand the music. And then the next thing is can I afford it? And if I can't afford it, how can I afford it? Or how can I get it? Or Was one of the band members a former skateboarder? And will I have a door open there because it's me asking for it? And the kid and the singer might have ridden a Powell Peralta skateboard, during the 80s, which has happened many, many times. I'm not going to mention who this is, but during Dogtown, there was one really prominent 70s music artist that didn't want to license us a piece of music that we really wanted. And we didn't have the money to pay him what he wanted. And so we said, look, Vans Shoes has financed our film. We'll give you and your family all the free shoes you want and pay you what we can pay you. And they went, wait a minute, shoes? And they go, what kind of shoes? We said, Vans shoes. And they go, how many? And we go, enough for your entire family for months. And this particular artist said, okay, I'll do it. So you have to beg, borrow, and steal, and you have to figure out ways to do it. But I also have worked with a woman named Deborah McCulloch, who literally, as a music clearance supervisor, she worked magic for us. Absolute, utter magic in what she was able to do, in the relationships that she's built up over the years, and the company that she works for is built up. She got doors open for us on all my films that I could have never done myself. And she literally had such a huge amount to do with this, as well as another former skateboarder named Mark Ryder, who now is the manager of Metallica.
Wow.
The two of them were instrumental in my films, in getting us access to the music.
So in addition to the feature films you've made, the documentaries that you made, you've had a really successful career as a commercial director as well. And
no, most people don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I was aware of that. I don't know if that's common knowledge.
I'm glad to hear that, because very few people know that.
Well, I'm curious though, but what would you say is your biggest strength or your skill set that you get hired for in a commercial setting? Like, in other words, let's say there's a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum, it's your ability to tell a great story and have empathy and curiosity. On the far other end of the spectrum is, a great eye behind a camera, or maybe technical knowledge of filmmaking. Like, where would you say your talents lie on that spectrum? And, does commercial work force you to flex different muscles?
Commercial work is incredible for flexing different muscles. It's the only work I do where I don't have to steal. It's the only work I do where I don't have to hop fences illegally and steal locations. It's the only work I do where I don't have to beg musicians to do soundtracks for me for free, for tiny bits of money. It's the only medium I work in where I actually get to have a real budget, real cameras, real technology, real crews, and get to pretend like I'm a real filmmaker. It's incredible. And I've been doing it for over 20 years. And it's actually how I make my living. I don't make a living doing documentary films. There just isn't enough money in the budget to get paid a decent living. And so I supplement my filmmaking with making commercials. And as far as why they pick me, I do primarily in the commercial world, I primarily do real people commercials, meaning nonfiction commercials, meaning I typically direct commercials that feature real people talking about their real experience with a product, whether it's for Yeti or North Face or Columbia Sportswear or whoever, or Carhartt, whoever it may be. It's typically with real people. And because of that, and because of my work in documentary filmmaking, when a company hires me, when an advertising agency hires me, they know that I know how to tell a story. And they also know how I know how to put music, choose the right music, work with editors. And they also know I'm very collaborative. I do not like drama. I don't make a mess of things. I don't yell at people. I'm really nice to work with. And I like to have a lot of fun when I'm working. I like to empower the people that are working for me and stay out of their way. And so people know this. And so if you come on my set, you'll see it's really filled with good vibes. We work our asses off, man, because I like working really fast. I'm very decisive. I like moving quickly, but I never throw emotions around ever. It's all fun, and let's work our asses off, but have as much fun as possible.
So in short, I guess you're a nice guy and you are very talented.
Well, however you want to put it,
I'll say it, so you don't have to. Yeah.
No, but you know what? There's value in being a nice person. It's done me really well in my life. It never pays to be a jerk. It just doesn't. And to be honest with you, if you're going to be a jerk, you have to be a a standout genius, and I'm not that person. So I don't have the ability to be a jerk because I don't have the standout genius to be, to back it up.
Well, that said, I found a quote of yours that I want to read because I think it's really poignant. And here's the quote. You said, "It's really dangerous to get good at something because when you do, you sometimes can prevent yourself from learning new things because you don't want to go backwards and put yourself in that kook phase. But when you do, and when you make yourself vulnerable, you open yourself up to life and it has a chance to get in you and work its magic. So go do something that you don't know how to do, spend months feeling insecure, and it's a horrible feeling, but in the end, that's the magic. Be a kook." And I'm wondering, is that a perspective of an adult, mature Stacy Peralta, or have you tried to live by that philosophy for a long time? Because, somebody coming from skateboarding and surfing, I mean, being called a kook it's up there with one of the worst things that you want somebody to call you.
Well, remember, there's two ways to look at a kook. There's the bad way about it, and there's the good way about it. The bad way is you're denigrating someone and their abilities. The good way is to say, wow, that person has the balls to expose themselves to this new thing that they might not figure out. And to be honest with you, I've lived my entire life like this. It's only now in my, that I'm older that I have begun to realize the ramifications of it. But I keep putting myself in situations of learning new things where I'm helpless, I'm completely uncertain, I'm really frustrated, I'm really angry at myself because it's taken me so long to get good at something. But when I work through all these things and finally figure the thing out that I'm trying to figure out, the joy and satisfaction and elation that I get from doing these things is so life-affirming. I'm doing a form of surfing right now called foil surfing. It took me 2.5 years to get to the point where I'm at right now. 2.5 years of being a complete idiot, okay? Of not knowing what I'm doing, terrified for my life that I'm going to get cut to shreds by this foil under my surfboard. I was an early adopter, meaning I came into the sport early when the technology was really pretty poor and it was changing every month. So I constantly had the wrong equipment and I kept getting setback and setback and setback until there were so many times where I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. But I had to do it. I just had to figure this out. And so I worked through this 2.5-year period of really feeling miserable and uncertain and insecure. But I finally got it, and I'm surfing in a way right now that if my 16-year-old self could have seen what I'm doing today, he would have thought that he was going to grow up to be George Jetson. It's that simple. But it would have never happened had I not dug my heels in and embraced being a kook. And it's happened with everything I've done. Everything. And I want to keep living a good life. I want to keep living a challenged life. There's a thing have you ever heard of the second law of thermodynamics?
No.
Okay.
I'm only familiar with 1 and 3. So
very good. Okay. The second law of thermodynamics essentially says this: everything eventually decays, meaning this: if you take a pot of boiling hot water that's on a stove and you take that pot of boiling hot water off the flame and you set it in the middle of the room, instead of the room becoming hot from that pot of boiling hot water, the pot of boiling hot water actually becomes room temperature. My point is this: if you get off the flame, you're going to become room temperature. I don't want to be room temperature. I want to keep the flame under me because I want to keep life exciting. And I don't want to be affected by the second law of thermodynamics. And I want this my whole life.
And how does leaning into that concept of being a kook, how does that philosophy inform your approach to creative endeavors? Has there ever been a time in your directorial career where you were secretly on set and you really felt like a kook and you felt you were just in over your head?
Dude, when I first started directing TV, and this is not a lie, I got awarded a big job at Universal Studios to direct the TV pilot, okay? I was so nervous. I got in my car and was driving home, and I was listening to the news, and there was a potential problem in Russia at the time. And it looked like there was going to be problems where we were going to maybe have to get a military and go over there and help. And I was actually hoping something would happen so I would get drafted. Then I wouldn't have to go and face this TV show that I was being given. I was so nervous that I was sick. It wasn't until maybe 10 years ago that I finally started walking onto sets, not feeling with so much trepidation. I always feel trepidation, but there was so much of the time where it almost made me sick. Now, to take it up to the current level, every single painting I start, my brain tells me I'm not going to do it. It just flat out says to me, you're not going to pull this one off. Says it every time. So the inner critic in me is loud as hell all the time, but my desire to do things is even louder than the critic. So I follow my desire rather than the critic.
Wow.
And I've always been that way my whole life. I don't want your viewers to think, oh, he's sailing right through life. He doesn't have that. No, my inner critic is loud every day, all day, 24 hours a day, all the time. But I try to keep my focus on what I want to do, and that's my desire, which I think is more powerful than anything.
Oh, it's admirable. Well, Stacy, we always like to end the podcast by asking the guests to plug something that they aren't directly involved with, but that they feel isn't getting enough attention. You know, it could be a book, a movie, an artist, a social cause. Is there something you want to shout out that people should know about?
I'm involved in this group called Ocean Cleanup. And it was a group that was founded, I believe, in Scandinavia by a fairly young kid. And this kid figured out where all the plastic in the ocean is coming from. And it's coming from a number of major rivers. And he thought, if we could get nets at the end of these specific major rivers and capture the plastic before it gets in the ocean, we might be able to, put a dent in all the plastic that's going in the ocean. It's something I donate money to because of the amount of plastic that we are currently dumping into this world. And this particular group, Ocean Cleanup, is doing a pretty damn remarkable job. Not only in the rivers, but also in the ocean itself. And what you see, if you look online, you look on Instagram, and you see what these guys are, the loads that these guys are pulling up is staggering, just staggering.
Wow. And people can go and look that up and donate online?
They can. Yeah, Ocean Cleanup.
Well, Stace, I want to say thanks so much for taking the time to sit down and chat. I know the work that you've done means an awful lot to me and an awful lot to a lot of people that I know. And I know you have, your self-doubts and you're your own biggest critic, but you've done a lot of amazing work, and I'm really grateful to have you on the show.
Well, thanks, Justin. This has been really nice talking to you.
So hopefully our paths will cross soon, and best of luck with the rest of your paintings. And if anybody has a chance, is the show still up?
Well, we sold everything, just about everything. So there was nothing to show. Yeah.
Good. Well, I believe it was Confucius that said, snooze, you lose. So if you weren't at the opening, you missed it.
No, there'll be another one. I'm going to be having another show at a gallery in Santa Monica. Looks like next July. So there's going to be another show following. So
okay, stay posted. I'd love to try and come out for that one.
Yeah, cool.
All right, Stacy, it's wonderful talking to you. Have a great day.
Okay, man. You too.
Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks to today's guest for dropping in. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and take a minute to rate, review, follow, or subscribe. This episode of The Plug contains original theme music by Andrew Van Weingarten and Dan Drohan. Mixing and sound design by Matt Boynton at Ultraviolet Audio, logo and branding by Italic at italic-studio.com, and you can check out my photography at justinj.com. Thanks again, and be sure to check out the archive and tune in for future conversations.